I was sitting at my kitchen table with a legal pad, not a notebook, a legal pad. Yellow, lined, the kind I used when I was still grading papers. One I bought in a 12-pack about 7 years ago that I still haven't finished. It was a Tuesday night. I had a copy of Matthew open on my left, a blue pen on my right, a red pen clipped to the legal pad. The question I was trying to answer was simple. I had seen it online, a comment actually under a video, and it had bothered me for 3 days. Someone wrote, "Jesus never criticized sinners. He only criticized the religious establishment." I wanted to test it, not assume it, not just believe it because it sounded right. Actually check. So I went through Matthew with 2 pens. Every time I found the word hypocrite, I marked it red. Every time I found who it was directed at, I marked it blue. I expected to find both colors pointing in different directions. Some at sinners, some at the religious class. Maybe it would be complicated. What I found stopped me completely. 14 red marks in Matthew, 14 instances of the word hypocrite. Then the blue marks. Who was Jesus calling a hypocrite? Tax collectors, 0. The woman caught in adultery, 0. The Roman centurion who asked for a healing, 0. Zacchaeus, the head tax collector who had defrauded half the city, 0. The Samaritan woman at the well, 0. The man born blind, the man with leprosy, the woman who anointed his feet, 0. Every blue mark was in the same column. Scribes, Pharisees, teachers of the law, the professional religious class. Not once, not a single time in the entire Gospel of Matthew did Jesus call an ordinary sinner a hypocrite. Every single instance aimed at the clergy. I put the legal pad down, sat with it for a minute, and then I thought, this isn't a detail. This is a portrait, a statistical portrait of who Jesus considered dangerous. And it wasn't who I'd been taught to think it was. You have sat in a building that cost more than most families in your neighborhood will ever earn. You have watched someone in elaborate vestments, embroidered cloth, gold thread, centuries of careful design, announce a collection while citing scripture about generosity. You have watched ushers pass plates. You have signed pledge cards. You have heard announcements about giving levels and building campaigns and naming opportunities on plaques. And somewhere in that building, in that service, in that moment, you felt something. Not doubt, not disrespect, something more specific, a gap between the thing you were sitting inside and whatever gave rise to the thing. You always sensed it. You probably filed it under doubt or insufficient faith or something your pastor would call spiritual immaturity. You didn't have language for the gap. Jesus did. He spent his entire recorded ministry naming it, loudly, in public, in the face of the people who ran the institution. My name is Nathan, 12 years teaching history at a Catholic school in Evansville, Indiana. I resigned in my early 40s. This channel is what I do now. I grew up in an evangelical church, small congregation, good people. Pastor named Whitfield, big man, kind eyes, preached from notes on yellow legal paper, which is probably why I ended up using legal pads for research. Pastor Whitfield loved Matthew 23. He preached it probably 4 or 5 times in the years I was there. The 7 woes, Jesus condemning the Pharisees. Every single time the Pharisees in those sermons were ancient, historical, a specific Jewish religious class that existed 2,000 years ago and was replaced, Pastor Whitfield was careful to say, by the grace of the new covenant. I remember nodding along. The day that stopped working for me was a Sunday about 15 years later. I was sitting in a very different kind of church, larger, newer, one of those campus-style mega-churches outside Indianapolis. Big screen behind the stage, lighting rig, 3 pastors, professional worship band, a giving app, and the sermon was Matthew 23. I was following along in my Bible. Jesus was denouncing the religious professionals of his time for tithing meticulously while neglecting justice and mercy, for praying publicly to be seen, for blocking ordinary people from access to God, for building elaborate public structures and putting their names on them, for turning the administration of religion into a financial system. And I looked around the building I was sitting in, and the structural parallel was so exact, so complete, that I had to put my Bible down. I left at the end of the service, sat in the parking lot for 40 minutes, went home, started reading Matthew 23 again, without the filter, without the assumption that it was about the ancient religious class and not the current one. Let me walk you through what Matthew 23 actually says, because most people who have been in church their whole lives have heard references to it, but very few have had it read to them straight, without the interpretive layer that turns it into ancient history. Jesus opens by addressing the crowd and his disciples, not the Pharisees, the ordinary people. He says, "The teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. They have legitimate authority. Do what they say, but do not do what they do, because they do not practice what they preach." That's the setup. Then come the woes. Woe number 1. You shut the door of the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those enter who are trying to. The charge: gatekeeping. Using institutional authority to control access to God, making yourself the necessary intermediary between ordinary people and the divine. Woe number 2. You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you have succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. The charge: the institution creates followers of the institution rather than followers of God. The convert ends up more trapped than before. Woe number 3. You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. The charge: obsessive attention to procedural correctness while ignoring the actual substance of moral life. Tithing mint and cumin, neglecting justice. Woe number 4. You clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. The charge: the performance of piety is not matched by inner reality. The institution looks holy. The inside is something else. Woe number 5. You are like whitewashed tombs which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of the bones of the dead and everything unclean. I need you to understand how brutal this is in its original context. A whitewashed tomb in 1st century Judea was whitened specifically because contact with a tomb made a person ritually unclean. The whitewashing was a warning sign, something that looked pristine on the outside, that was full of death and contamination. Jesus was saying your institutions are dead on the inside, and you paint them white so people don't know what's in there. Woe number 6. You build tombs for the prophets and decorate the graves of the righteous. You say, if we had lived in the days of our ancestors, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. You testify against yourselves. The charge: honoring dead prophets while silencing living ones. Building memorials to the people your predecessors killed, and doing exactly what your predecessors did. And then the final line of Matthew 23. Not a woe, a verdict. You snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? This is not gentle Jesus, meek and mild. This is not a theological debate between competing rabbinic schools. This is a public condemnation. Formal, structured, 7 counts, delivered in the temple, in front of the crowd, in front of everyone. Now let me give you the whip, because this is the part that people know about, the temple cleansing, but rarely think all the way through. All 4 Gospels record it: Matthew, Mark, Luke, John. The only event with that kind of complete gospel attestation. John's account is the most detailed. Chapter 2, verses 13 through 16. Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple courts he found people selling cattle, sheep and doves, and others sitting at tables exchanging money. So he made a whip out of cords and drove all from the temple courts, both sheep and cattle. He scattered the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. I need to pause on 3 words. He made a whip. He did not arrive angry and act impulsively. He arrived, surveyed the situation, and then, deliberately with his hands, fashioned a weapon. That is not an emotional outburst. That is a decision. And what was his stated justification? Get these out of here. Stop turning my father's house into a marketplace. Mark's account adds the prophetic dimension. Jesus quotes Isaiah 60 and Jeremiah 7. Is it not written, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations"? But you have made it a den of robbers. Here is what J.J. Benítez observed about this moment in Caballo de Troya. The money changers and animal sellers were not freelancers operating without permission. They were there because the temple system required them. The temple tax had to be paid in a specific coin. Roman coins had the image of Caesar, which the temple would not accept. So money changers existed to convert Roman currency into temple currency, and they extracted a fee. The animals for sacrifice, the doves, the sheep, the oxen, were sold because pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem could not carry animals for sacrifice on the road. They were buying this access from a system that had monetized the path between the ordinary worshipper and God. Every person who wanted to approach God through the temple had to pass through the financial layer the institution had installed. Jesus didn't walk past that system. He didn't politely note his theological objections. He fashioned a weapon and demolished the infrastructure. The only act of physical violence attributed to Jesus in the Gospels, directed at the monetization of organized religion. Think about that carefully. Not directed at a Roman soldier, not at a tax collector, Acts, not at anyone who had personally wronged him. At the financial machinery of institutional religion. Benítez's witnesses in Caballo de Troya described the scene with something I've never found in a homily. The temple was a large complex. This was not a quiet act. Tables crashing, coins scattering across stone, animals running, sellers scrambling, and the money changers didn't fight back. They ran. Because whatever was driving that man with the whip was not something you stood in front of. Think about the last time you prayed in public, at a meal before the food came, in a church service, led by a professional voice at a microphone, in a group at the start of a meeting. Now read Matthew chapter 6, verses 5 and 6. These are not obscure verses. They are from the Sermon on the Mount, the most famous extended teaching Jesus ever gave. When you pray, do not be like the hypocrites. They love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. Do not be like the hypocrites. The hypocrites pray publicly, to be seen. Jesus is not describing optional guidance here. This is direct instruction from the middle of his most famous sermon. Go into your room, close the door, pray in private, and then look at what the institution built in his name. Cathedrals, designed specifically for public worship, architecture of maximum visible piety, public liturgy, communal recitation, worship services designed to be witnessed and performed in front of an audience. The institution built, stone by stone, the exact practice Jesus condemned in the most famous sermon he ever gave. That is not interpretation. That is a direct comparison between a specific text and a specific institution, available to anyone who holds both simultaneously and reads them straight. I want to be honest about something, because this is the kind of material where it is easy to slide from evidence into grievance, from observation into accusation, and I don't want to do that. When I sat in that mega-church parking lot for 40 minutes 15 years ago, I was furious. Not sad, furious. Because I had spent years in these institutions. I had taught inside one. I had helped educate children in a framework that, when I finally looked at it plainly, seemed to be doing the exact thing it claimed to be founded to oppose. It took me a long time to separate the anger from the question. The question was, is this what Jesus actually said? The anger was, why wasn't I told? And they are different questions. The first one has an answer. The second one is more complicated. What I can tell you is that the textual evidence is not ambiguous. Matthew 23 is not open to multiple interpretations. Jesus' critique of the religious establishment of his time is systematic, comprehensive, and the most elaborate sustained condemnation in the entire gospel record. Not sinners, not Romans, not tax collectors, not any class of ordinary people, the religious professionals. Let me tell you what Bart Ehrman and E.P. Sanders have both argued about the temple action. Because for the English-speaking audience, understanding what Jesus was actually doing in the temple requires the academic framing. Ehrman, in Jesus, Apocalyptic Prophet of the New Millennium, notes that Jesus almost certainly did not expect to be founding a lasting institution. His preaching was apocalyptic. He expected an imminent end of the current age and the establishment of something radically different. When Jesus spoke of the kingdom of God, the phrase he used more than any other, he was not describing a church. He was not describing a structure with professional clergy, tithes, and Sunday services. He was describing something that would replace the current order entirely. E.P. Sanders, in Jesus and Judaism, makes the argument even more precise. The temple action, Sanders argues, was a prophetic symbolic act, not a reform effort, not an attempt to clean up institutional religion and make it function better. A prophetic announcement. Like the prophets of Israel who performed symbolic acts to announce imminent judgment, Isaiah walking barefoot, Ezekiel lying on his side. Jesus overturning the tables was a sign, not "fix this." This is ending. The temple would be destroyed. The system would be replaced. The age was turning. Sanders's interpretation transforms what looks like a protest into something more final. Jesus was not standing inside the temple trying to reform it. He was announcing its obsolescence. And J.J. Benítez, who spent 40 years in these sources, arrived at the same conclusion through a different path. After 40 years of investigation, Benítez's summary was direct. The religion of Jesus has nothing to do with religion. Not, the religion of Jesus is a better religion. Not, Jesus wanted to reform religion. Has nothing to do. Here's Jesus, observed through the Caballo de Troya accounts, advocated for what Benítez called la religión del espíritu, the religion of the spirit. No dogmas, no temples, no professional mediators between a person and God. And then Benítez added something that stopped me the first time I read it. He wasn't talking only about the Catholic Church. Not only the Catholic Church, all religions are a business. Every organized religion, every structure that has inserted itself between a person and the divine, charged a fee for access and called that fee sacred. Benítez was including all of them. The system is the system. The institution is the institution. Whatever name you put on the door, you have felt the disconnect, I know you have. The gap between the man in the Gospels and the institution that occupies his name. The man who fashioned a whip and drove out the money changers. And the institution that operates a financial infrastructure more sophisticated than most corporations. The man who said, "Go into your room and close the door." And the institution that built the most expensive, elaborate, publicly visible buildings in human history, specifically for communal religious performance. The man who said the weightier matters are justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And the institution that has spent extraordinary energy on tithing procedures and dress codes and doctrinal compliance, while people suffer outside the building. You weren't wrong to feel that gap. You weren't lacking faith. You weren't being disrespectful. You weren't spiritually immature. You were reading the same text. The disconnect you felt is documented, chapter and verse. Now I want to give you the John 4 passage, because it is the most radical of everything I've described, and it is the least preached. Jesus is speaking to the Samaritan woman at the well. John chapter 4 verses 21 through 24. She asks him about the correct place to worship. Samaritans worshipped on Mount Gerizim. Jews worshipped in Jerusalem. Which one is right? Jesus' answer is worth reading in full. Woman, believe me, a time is coming when you will worship the Father, neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we do know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshippers will worship the Father in the Spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshippers the Father seeks. God is Spirit, and his worshippers must worship in the Spirit and in truth. Neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. Not, the correct location is Jerusalem. Not, let me give you the right answer between the two options you presented. Neither. The concept of a sacred location, the pillar of every organized religion in human history, is abolished in 2 sentences. Sacred mountains abolished. Sacred cities abolished. Sacred buildings implied abolished. God is spirit. Worship must be in spirit and truth. Location is irrelevant. The building is irrelevant. This is not a fringe reading, this is the plain text of John chapter 4, and it sits in a tradition that built the Vatican, and Canterbury Cathedral, and the Basilica of the National Shrine, and 40,000 other structures representing billions in construction costs, specifically designed to be sacred locations for organized worship, in direct structural contradiction to the most explicit statement Jesus ever made about where and how worship was supposed to happen. Mark chapter 7 adds another layer. Jesus to the Pharisees. You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. You have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. Not, your traditions are imperfect implementations of God's commands, setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. The critique is not of individual bad actors, it is of the structural logic of institutionalized religion itself. The institution generates traditions. The traditions become more important than the original impulse that generated the institution. The original impulse gets buried under the traditions. Jesus wasn't describing a problem unique to the Pharisees. He was describing the operating logic of every religious institution, including the one that would carry his name. I want to tell you where this left me, because I've spent 15 years with these questions, and I don't want to give you the impression that it resolved cleanly. It didn't. What I came to, slowly, badly, through a lot of dead ends, is something that I think is actually supported by the text. Jesus wasn't anti-God, he was anti-intermediary. The anger was specific, not at devotion, not at faith, not at the desire to encounter something larger than yourself, at the machinery that had installed itself between that desire and its object, and was charging admission. The Pharisees hadn't invented this problem. They had inherited and perfected it, and every institution that came after them, in every tradition, has faced the same gravitational pull. Institutions need revenue. Revenue requires structure. Structure requires hierarchy. Hierarchy generates gatekeeping. Gatekeeping generates resentment. Resentment generates profits. Jesus was a prophet. The institution built in his name produced the same resentment in the next cycle. Benítez saw this clearly. The religion of Jesus has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with the cycle. What Jesus was pointing toward, the closed door, the private room, the direct address to an intimate God in a language that assumed you were already in the room with him, was designed to short-circuit the cycle, remove the intermediary, remove the sacred building, remove the professional class, remove the tithing system, remove the public performance, and see what's left. A person in a private room with the door closed, saying, Abba. That's the religion of Jesus. And the institution that carries his name cannot sell that, cannot charge admission, cannot build a campus around it, cannot staff it with professionals, cannot put a giving app on it. So the institution built something else and put his name on the door. The building doesn't make you closer to God. The robes don't make someone holier. The collection plate doesn't buy anyone passage. The elaborate ceremony doesn't add anything to a conversation you can have in a private room with the door closed. Jesus said all of that, explicitly, in the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew 23, in John chapter 4, in Mark chapter 7, and in the temple courtyard with a whip made of cords. It's in the text. Your distrust of the gap between the institution and the origin wasn't ignorance, it wasn't rebellion, it wasn't weak faith, it was you reading accurately. The most anti-institutional voice in the entire New Testament belongs to the person the institution was built to honor. That's not a contradiction I invented. It's the contradiction that's been sitting in the text since the 1st century, waiting for someone to read it straight. Here is what I want to close with. Not an argument, just an observation. When I was building the Matthew 23 spreadsheet, the 14 hypocrites, the 2 columns, there was one detail I hadn't planned for. The last line, after the 7 woes, after the brood of vipers. Jesus looks at Jerusalem, and he says, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets and stone those sent to you, how often I have longed to gather your children together, as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. And you were not willing, not triumphant, not contemptuous. Greece. This man who had just publicly, methodically condemned the entire institutional apparatus of his religion with 7 formal charges, looked at the city that contained the institution and grieved. Because underneath the 14 red marks and the 2 pens and the legal pad and the structural analysis, there was a human being who wanted something for the people inside those institutions, not their subjugation, not their replacement by a better institution, something he called the kingdom, which he never quite finished describing, because the description was always gesturing at something outside the frame, something that could not be institutionalized, could not be formalized, could not be put in a building and scheduled for Sunday mornings, something you had to encounter in a private room. With the door closed, the rebel is already in the book. He's been there the whole time. You decide what to do with that.